Welcome to the Roy Morgan Weekly Update. This week, support for the Labor government was down 1% to 52%, just ahead of the coalition on 48% on a two-party preferred basis. Now, this result is almost identical to the last federal election. And if a federal election were held today, the Albanese government would be returned with a narrow majority. Support for the parties can bounce around a few percentage points each week, responding to the issues of the day or to that week. And Roy Morgan's weekly read of the nation's voting intention picks up these responses. However, the long-term trend has been stable since the Albanese government's honeymoon period ended. Roy Morgan's polling trends over the last 6 months, comprising over 30,000 interviews with electors, show the 6-month average is very much in line with the latest result, at 52 versus 48% in favour of Labor. And these results, of course, augur well for the government, which faces a by-election in the seat of Dunkley in just over 2 weeks. Government confidence was up 4.5 points to 82.5. Now, that's a second positive weekly move in a row, but it's still low. Government confidence is still well below the neutral level of 100 at only 82.5, because only 34% of Australians say the country's heading in the right direction, while 51.5, the majority, say the country's heading in the wrong direction. Consumer confidence dipped this week. ANZ Roy Morgan consumer confidence was down 1.2 points to 82.6. Now, driving the decrease were homeowners, and consumer confidence for this group dipped 5.2 points, while renters' consumer confidence was virtually unchanged, and for those people paying off their homes, they recorded slightly improved consumer confidence. So consumer confidence has now spent 54 weeks below the level of 85, the longest time below 85 in the history of the measurement. Inflation expectations were unchanged at 4.9% this week. So Australians now expect annual inflation to be 4.9% over the next 2 years. This is their equal lowest since mid-September 2023. And finally this week, to the Australian employment market. So real unemployment in Australia was virtually unchanged in January at 8.9% of the workforce, equivalent to 1.382 thousand Australians, or 1.3 million Australians, or 1,382,000 Australians. Underemployment in January was 1.6 million, down 33,000 on December, and at 10.4% of the workforce. Still the second highest rate of underemployment since June 2017. The overall figures show total unemployment and underemployment, what we might call workforce underutilisation, was 19.3% of the workforce in January, equivalent to 3 million people or more for a fourth straight month. As we've said throughout last year, these monthly movements occur within a broader context of a surging population and a surging workforce. Compared to January a year ago, unemployment is down 225,000. But January a year ago was a real outlier, not in line with the broader trends at that time. So the comparison between the latest figures for January compared to a year ago, we believe, is somewhat misleading. A more helpful comparison is to look at the Australian labour force over the last 6 months and compare that to the 6 months before, which shows significant changes to the workforce across a broader time period. It's just more realistic. So Australia's population aged 14 plus in the last 6 months, largely the working age population, has averaged over 22.2 million, up by 388,000 compared to the 6 months prior. Our workforce is now almost 15.5 million, up by 381,000 compared to the 6 months prior. More Australians are employed, 13,949,000, almost 14 million Australians are employed. That's up by 278,000 compared to the 6 months prior. and 63,000 more in full-time employment, 215,000 more in part-time employment. However, both unemployment and underemployment have trended higher in recent months compared to the 6 months before. Unemployment has averaged 1.5 million over the last 6 months, up by 103,000 compared to the six months prior. Underemployment is even higher, averaging 1.5 million over the last 6 months, up by 127,000 compared to the earlier period. Now, this is the first time ever that both measures have averaged over 1.5 million over an extended period. And of most concern is that Australian unemployment and underemployment combined has averaged over 3 million over the last 6 months, up by a large 230,000 from the prior 6 months. That indicates a sustained rise in labour underutilisation in the economy. And this is one of the most important problems facing the federal government this year. And that's a wrap. Thanks for your interest this week in Roy Morgan's latest results, and I'll be back next week to bring you the most up-to-date readings on consumer confidence, inflation expectations, voting intention, and business confidence. Thanks for listening.